Camera rolling. 130, 140. That actually makes you feel slightly ill. Whoa! The Audi e-tron GT has perhaps never had quite the credit it deserves because it's always been a fantastic electric car. Great to drive, quick to charge, and jaw-droppingly good to look at. It's just that it arrived slightly later than another electric car, which was very similar underneath, but had a smarter interior, a bigger boot, and was even sharper to drive. But that could be about to change because this is the new Audi e-tron GT. In this video, I'm going to be telling you exactly what's changed, both for good and for bad, and deciding if this is the best high-performance electric car that you can buy. But let's start with a quick recap on the e-tron GT, because although many of you will know plenty about this car already, it's been on sale since 2020, some of you won't. So this is Audi's flagship electric car, and it actually shares a lot in common with the Porsche Taycan. It sits on the same platform, and actually most of the electrical components between the two cars are shared as well. On the outside here, not a lot has changed really. So you've got a restyled front bumper. If you go for the range-topping RS models, then there's an L-shaped design on the outer edge here. This is an S model, and it's a very similar story around the back as well, because although the basic look of the e-tron GT is the same as before, there is now a new rear diffuser down here. This is an S version, as I just said. If you go for an RS, then you get a more aggressive design with a vertical reflector lens down there. On the range-topping RS Performance, there's also the option to have some camouflaged carbon. You can have that on the diffuser here, on the door mirrors, and on the front of the car as well. So it's a bit Lamborghini. It won't be to everyone's tastes, but you do have that option. You don't have to have it. Anyway, there are also 4 new paint colours to choose from and 2 new alloy wheel designs. But really, in terms of the changes that you can actually see and you'll actually notice here on the outside, we're talking about pretty small ones. Now, although the e-tron GT has a low-slung coupe-esque look to it, you might have noticed that it does have rear doors. So this isn't some highly impractical sports car, as I will now demonstrate by getting in. So it's pretty easy to get into to start with, and when you're in here you will find a surprising amount of space actually. I'm just over 6 foot tall. This seat in front here is set up for my driving position, and look, I've got loads of foot space, plenty of knee room, and these seats, they're really comfortable as well. They're supportive, they hold you in place well when you're going around corners because of these bolsters here on the base. So even someone of my height would be absolutely fine here on a long journey. In fact, the only slight complaint is the amount of headroom, because although I'm okay at the moment, if I move my head towards the outer edges of the roof, then my head does hit the ceiling there. So I have to kind of move it slightly inwards, and then I can take advantage of this full single piece of glass on the roof. And that is worth talking about because it's new to the e-tron GT. It is called a panoramic roof, as you might expect, but with switchable transparency. And what that means is that you can use the touchscreen in the front to make the roof completely clear, opaque, or you can put patterns in it like the ones you see up there at the moment. Anyway, onto the boot, which is a pretty decent size actually. So officially this is a 350 litre boot, goes back quite a long way in there. There's even some underfloor storage, and you can also fold down the rear seats if you need to carry more luggage. However, as you can see, this is a saloon, so obviously the aperture is quite small, and that can make loading bigger things into this boot a bit of a struggle. That is the same story if you go for a saloon version of the Porsche Taycan, but with that car you can also have it as an estate. So not only do you get much better access, but you can also get a bit more usable boot space as well. So it is a shame that you can still only get the e-tron GT as a saloon, particularly when you consider Audi's glorious history of building fast estate cars. But as I say, it isn't as though you're going to struggle to carry enough luggage for a weekend away in the e-tron GT, and there's also a small amount of storage space under the bonnet for the charging cables. And that brings me on to charging, because the e-tron GT has always been one of the fastest charging electric cars around, and now it's even faster. So before, it could accept up to 270 kilowatts of charging power, and that's now gone up to 320 kilowatts for short periods. So that means that you'll be waiting less time for a charge. A 10 to 80% top up can now take as little as 18 minutes, although it is important to point out that that is in ideal conditions, and it does depend on things like the battery temperature and the mood of the particular charging point that you're plugged into. But there is a clever gadget inside that can give you a good idea of the charging speed that you'll actually be getting from the charging point before you actually arrive at it. And I'll show you that in more detail a little bit later on. If you plug in at home using a 7 kilowatt wall box, then you can expect to wait around 17 hours for a 0 to 100% charge. The reason that charging time is so long if you plug in at home, or perhaps on your hotel balcony, is because the e-tron GT has an enormous battery with a usable capacity of 97 kilowatt hours. As you might expect, that means it can travel big distances between charges. So this is the S version. It has the longest range of any e-tron GT, and it can officially do up to 375 miles on a charge, although it does vary a little bit depending on things like the size of the alloy wheels you go for. If you go for an RS version, then the range drops a little bit, but only by around 10 or 15 miles. Now, of course, official range is one thing. How far you'll actually be able to get in the real world is quite another. But as long as you're not doing autobahn speeds, then this car should quite easily be able to do 300 miles or more from a charge, which when you factor in how quickly it can charge up if you plug in at a fast CCS point, then that means this is a fantastic electric car for doing long distances in. Now, before we go for a drive, I just want to show you this interior because there have been some changes, but this certainly isn't a revolution because the differences are fairly subtle. So that means you still get the same great driving position. You feel low down in the car. In a lot of EVs, you're quite high up in the car because you've got the battery beneath you. But here, as I say, a low slung driving position, you feel like you're in a proper coupe or performance car, and that is a good thing. The fundamentals of the driving position are very good as well. So you've got a steering wheel, pedals and a seat that line up well with one another, and also the seats, they're comfortable. So they're the same basic shape as they were before, but you now get a new design. So you get an S badge up here below the head restraint, and also you might have noticed that this seat is not leather, it is fabric. Now you get leather as standard, but if you pay £600 or so extra, then you can opt for a no leather, more eco-friendly option. And to be honest, that is a little bit cheeky because traditionally, of course, you would have paid extra to have leather seats over fabric, whereas now you're being charged extra to downgrade from leather to fabric. But they're actually quite nice and they don't feel cheap at all. Other changes include this new anthracite birch finish on the face of the dashboard and the inside of the doors here. And you also get a new steering wheel. So not only does it have a flat bottom, but now it also has a flat top. And if you go for an RS version, then you'll get a 12 o'clock marker up on the top and a couple of red buttons further down. One of those buttons allows you to quickly engage the RS modes, and the other one is a boost button. So if you press that, then you'll get even more power for around about 10 seconds or so. But the basic design of the interior is the same as before. So this center console here, still very solid, no complaints there, but it doesn't feel or look particularly upmarket for a car that costs this much money. I'll tell you exactly how much the e-tron GT costs a little later on. And that's because a lot of the buttons and switches are borrowed from cheaper Audi models. So this touch sensitive volume control here, that is pretty much the same as the one you'll find in an A3, as is the start button. And also these climate controls up here, because they don't feel cheap or nasty, but they don't have quite the luxury feel that you might expect. However, you do get proper physical controls for the air conditioning, which is a great thing. So we're always complaining that every time a manufacturer updates a car or releases a new model, that it either goes for fiddly touch sensitive controls for the air conditioning, or even worse, it puts those controls into the touchscreen above. But Audi hasn't done that, so it means that if I want to adjust the interior temperature, all I do is just press a button. Very simple, no faffing around, so well done, Audi. There are some touch-sensitive controls here though, and they are on the steering wheel. So that means that when you're going around a corner, you're driving along, it's quite easy to brush something and activate the heated steering wheel by accident. But then by the same token, when you actually want to press a button on here, it's quite difficult to find the one you want because you don't really know where your thumb is. So you have to study these symbols to make sure you're pressing the one that you want. So not ideal, but as I say, it's a good thing that at least Audi has stuck with proper physical controls for the air conditioning. One other thing I want to show you is something I mentioned yesterday, and that is a feature that allows you to see how fast you're likely to be able to charge when you get to a charging point before you actually get there. And that is thanks to this updated virtual cockpit here behind the steering wheel. So if I go to the battery and charging menu, I can see not only the temperature of the battery, but also the kilowatts that this car thinks I'll be able to achieve when I plug in. Now at the moment, as you can see, it's barely anything. And that's because the battery has been charging overnight. We're on 100%. So I think it's about time we actually went for a drive. So not huge changes to the interior of this car then, but there have been much bigger changes underneath the e-tron GT that affect the way that it drives. Now this S version comes with air suspension as standard, and it delivers a really smooth ride actually, particularly at high speeds, but even around town. Some of the roads here in Frankfurt aren't actually that great. And yet this car has dealt with them really well, potholes, expansion joints. So this isn't just comfy by performance car standards, it's comfy full stop, and it's also really quiet. There's very little suspension or road noise. And there's good news when it comes to handling too, because although this is not a light car, it weighs almost 2.4 tons, you would never guess because it feels agile, it feels light on its toes, it grips well, and even the steering, it's nicely weighted, it's accurate. The only slightly annoying thing is that unless you turn off the lane keep assist system, every time you stray anywhere near a white line, it tries to drag you back into the centre of your lane. But other than that, really, really impressive. And I think compared with the Porsche Taycan, you'd have to drive the cars back to back to really notice the difference. There is another new suspension system available on the e-tron GT though, and that is called active suspension. So what that does is that places a hydraulic damper in every corner of the car, and they are fed by a hydraulic pump. So when you turn into a corner, the corresponding dampers activate and effectively prop that side of the car up to keep the body level. It does the same job when you're braking to reduce nosedive, and also when you accelerate hard to reduce the amount of lift at the front of the car. Now that system is not available on the S version in the UK at the moment, but it is optional on the S in some other markets, and there is a chance that it will become available in the future. But handling is only part of the remit of a high performance car like this. It also needs to be good at going long distances at high speeds. So let's head out onto the Autobahn to find out how it copes with those environments. Okay, so we're just joining a de-restricted section of Autobahn here, very, very quiet, so we're not doing anything silly. And here we go. So officially this car can do 152 miles an hour, the RS versions are limited to 155, but we got way past that, up to 158. And you know what? It's remarkable how composed and stable this car feels at these sorts of speeds. It's even fairly quiet. There is of course some road and wind noise when we get up to sort of 140 miles an hour and beyond that. But as I say, very composed and stable. In fact, the only real problem with going this kind of speed, as long as it's safe to do so, is the fact that the range, or the predicted range, is dropping like a stone. So I think I better slow down. And anyway, you can't do those kind of speeds in the UK unless you visit a racetrack. But what you can do is 0 to 60. So I think it's about time we found out how quickly the e-tron GT can do that. And for that, we're going to use the range-topping RS Performance. It is the most expensive version of the e-tron GT you can buy. It has more than 900 brake horsepower in launch mode, and it also has that clever active suspension that I talked about earlier. So when I go to get in the car, it jacks itself up to make it easier for me to get inside. Whoa! That actually makes you feel slightly ill. Full disclosure, I have a passenger sitting next to me operating the timing gear, and that just did 0 to 60 in 2.4 seconds. Now that was the range-stopping RS Performance, of course, which has 738 brake horsepower, even before you've activated launch control, and can do 0 to 62, officially at least, in 2.5 seconds. But even the normal RS has 671 brake horsepower and can do 0 to 62 in less than 3 seconds. In fact, this S version, the cheapest version you can buy, has as much power as the pre-facelifted RS version of the e-tron GT. So it has 584 brake horsepower and can do 0 to 62 in just 3.4 seconds. So whichever version of the e-tron GT you choose, you are going to have one of the very fastest cars on the road. But it is also one of the more expensive. So before we talk about prices, you should probably brace yourself, because even this entry-level S version starts at more than £107,000. That's not just a huge amount of money in isolation, it's around £20,000 more than the starting price of the Porsche Taycan. There are some mitigating factors though, because there's no longer an entry-level basic version of the e-tron GT sold in the UK. So this is more of an equivalent of the Taycan 4S. It's still more expensive than that car, but then again, you do get more standard equipment. If you want an RS version of the e-tron GT, you'll be spending at least £126,000, and the RS Performance, that starts at around 143k. So clearly, whichever version of the e-tron GT you choose, you're going to be spending a lot of money. That is, unless you're a company car driver, of course, because if you are, then you will benefit from paying very little benefit in kind tax. So if you are lucky enough to have one of these on your list of options, then you could argue it's a bit of a bargain. Thanks for watching this video. If you want to watch another one, click up there. And to read our full detailed written review of the Audi e-tron GT, click there.